Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 87 of the 1% Better podcast. Thanks for checking it out, as always. And I won't do a huge long ramble tonight or today, whenever you're listening. I will probably do a solo show soon enough. It's been an interesting few weeks, and I haven't probably been as prolific with releasing stuff as a result, but hopefully over the next while we'll get a number of shows that have been recorded out, and I'll share more stuff in a solo episode soon. But this one is with a very, very interesting character, Alistair Rogers. Alistair is originally from Wales, but he's been living in New Zealand for, I guess, nearly 15 to 20 years, and his area of expertise was certainly in the area of performance, using video analysis to help the All Blacks rugby team win a couple of World Cups. Is pretty good going. And in the last few years, he's moved more into the coaching side, working with the Auckland Blues, and just recently with Samoa, just on the November tour, just gone. If you're interested in performance, understanding the growth mindset, how to get that extra 1%, certainly using the technologies and tools Alistair has in the areas of video analysis, you'll learn a lot from this. If you have a fascination of the All Blacks rugby mindset and culture, you'll definitely get something from it as well. And as I just look down through these show notes, of which I think I've taken probably the most ever, there's a lot of learnings in the areas of psychology, performance, mindset. What else did we talk about? Behaviours, goal setting. And the area that I'm probably most fascinated about myself in the last year or so is getting to know yourself better, self-awareness, developing emotional intelligence, and really trying to better yourself. As the whole theme of the podcast would suggest, trying to improve in small increments with deliberate practice. So Alistair is somebody that certainly ticks a lot of those boxes, and shared his journey in detail for this podcast. So I will leave it there, and I hope you really enjoy. As always, if you're a new listener, maybe check out the website, sign up to the newsletter, subscribe to the podcast. There's 86 other episodes of this, and the other podcast, the 864, is out as well. All I ask is for you to give me feedback, to tell me how it's going. If you're enjoying these, let me know. We're coming to the end of season 2, I guess, kind of wrap that up in the next month or so, and do a reboot and a reset for next year, setting 2019 goals and all that good stuff. Lots of that to come. Maybe I'll talk a bit more about that in the solo show. But as always, I really, really hope you take something positive from this episode and learn something and enjoy it. Thanks, and have a great day. Hey folks, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I guess the reason I'm stumbling across that one is because it's 8 a.m. in the morning here, and I'm not used to recording this early, but the reason behind it is I'm talking to Alistair Rogers, and Alistair is in New Zealand, Auckland specifically, Alistair?
It is, yeah.
Great, and it's 8 p.m. there and 8 a.m. here, so we have quite a disparate time difference, but great to have you along, Alistair. Folks that mightn't be aware of who you are, can you maybe give yourself an introduction, what you do currently, and we certainly can take it from there.
Yeah, look, Rob, first of all, thanks very much for having me on. Currently, my role is assistant coach of Samoa. That's rugby union. So I've got 2 roles on the go at the moment, so that's the latest and greatest. Alongside that, I've got a job with the NZRU, so New Zealand Rugby Union, as a high-performance coach. So what that involves is going around the country coaching coaches. So a busy time.
Brilliant. Two very interesting roles there. Definitely, for me, the high performance piece is something I'm fascinated about, and as we'll talk through it, I'll probably give you a bit more colour around that. for folks listening, though, they're probably picking up on your accent a little bit there. It seems to be quite a unique mix of a couple of cultures. Can you maybe talk me through your background, where you originate from?
Yeah, so it's definitely not South Africa. A lot of people actually
True.
say
I could
say
pick that up
me,
actually a little bit there.
Yeah. But it's probably something that I've termed Quelsh. So I was born in Wales, and I moved to New Zealand 20 something years ago. So I've been here quite a while. So there's a nice blend of Welsh and Kiwi accent in there.
I think I could pick up more Kiwi at the start, and then kind of certain Welsh stuff came out there a few seconds ago. But it's a fascinating story, I suppose, the last 20 years in New Zealand. But I was reading a little bit about you, and I think when you were growing up, rugby was certainly the major focus. I'd imagine. I think your dad gave you some good advice in those early years. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I was pretty sporty as a kid, and I had to kind of make a decision when I was around 16 years old whether I was going to have a crack at soccer or cricket or rugby. And rugby, we were a rugby family, and obviously, Wales are pretty mad on the sport, and that was the first choice. So that was the path that I decided to kind of follow, just purely because of my love for the game. And then I got to an opportunity. So I'd played professionally for a number of years. I'd been with Neath, which were the Welsh All Blacks. Mm-hmm. I'd been with Aberavon, which was a club down South Wales. So I had a number of clubs, but in the back of my mind, the advice that Dad had given me when I was a young fella was, you got to go to New Zealand if you want to learn the game, because they were the best in the world in his eyes. And the All Blacks, he loved the All Blacks. So he said, look, you've got to go there to learn your craft. So I always had that advice back in the back of my mind, and I just waited for an opportunity, which came about with a friend of mine who was playing for Neath, and he was a Tongan player who's in Wellington in New Zealand, and him and I got pretty friendly, and he said to me one day, look, would you be interested in going to my club? And that was the opportunity that I'd waited for, really. And I just kind of had Lynn Jones was the coach there in Neath at the time, and I had to chat to Lynn because I was pretty young and wasn't really playing, and so ended up within a couple of weeks, Lynn had agreed to let me go, and paid my own flights, and off to Wellington I went.
Wow, big! So what, you were about 18 or 19 or so at that age, were you?
20, yeah. Okay,
very young. And I guess at that point, your aspirations were from a rugby playing perspective. How far did you see yourself going, or did you start to think, maybe there's another angle that I could stay involved in the sport?
No, I guess for me it was just about being the best that I could be, and I wasn't aware of how far I could go, but I just wanted to give it a try and to see how far I could go. It was always a bit of a challenge, and when I got to Wellington, I was really lucky to be involved in a club which had won a premiership and was stacked with international players. Because they all at that time, a lot of the All Blacks were still playing club rugby, and the Tongan internationals and Samoan internationals. So my team was stacked, and it gave me a fantastic grounding, really, in learning. And I met a lot of good people who helped me along the way, and got to a point where I thought, well, I knew I was going to stay in New Zealand for the rest of my life, but in the back of my mind was always, well, how far could I go in Wales? So that was when I decided to go back, and had a contract to play for Abervale, because Wales had then had 9 professional teams.
Right.
So I moved back to Wales, and started with Abervale. Played a number of games there, and got injured. Graham Henry was the coach of Wales. I met Graham. We'd had a number of chats about the possibility of me playing for Wales, but my injury had closed my shop door. After that, I was out for a substantial amount of time, and changed of coach to Steve Hansen. And that was me. I think that was my window gone.
Right.
So that was just how it panned out from a playing career.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've interviewed a couple of other folks in the rugby world, and one an Irish guy, Cork guy, Johnny Holland. He played for Munster a couple of years ago, and he got an injury. I think it was a hamstring off the bone injury, and never could really make it fully back. But I guess at that point, a new career kind of opened up as a result. So it sounds like something similar happened for you. The area of performance, when you were trying to improve and trying to get better yourself as a player, were you maniacally focused on making improvements in your game, or was that analytical view always there?
Yeah, it was there. I didn't really know, or hadn't recognised it then. To be honest, I always wanted to get better, so we used to use the old videotapes, and I'd spend quite a bit of time play and pause, watching the tapes and writing down notes, but everything was to do with my game, and so I was pretty analytical as a player, but never really realised that it was just purely for me to understand how my performance went and what I could do to improve. It wasn't until I kind of, when I'd finished playing, went into the real world for a stint, and what I would call the real world, which is the office working world. And I always wanted to finish and then be a coach. That was I'd had that in the back of my mind, and because I was from a family of teachers, so my sister's a teacher, and my cousin's a lot of teachers, and so I always liked the teaching aspect. So that was the aim for me, and I got a call from Mike Gervais, who was with me in Abervale, and he'd asked whether I'd be interested in going to coach in Ireland, in Ballina. Yeah. Up in the Mayo there. So that's what I did. I kind of leapt out of the real world and back into the coaching world, and it was a great opportunity for me to go there and actually live that life. It was thoroughly enjoyed it. Had a great time, learned a lot, but I was still only 20, maybe 28, and what I felt was I still had a little bit of a burning desire to go back and play and get that out of the way first before I committed myself to being a coach. Right. So I managed to have a season with London Welsh, and then I moved back to New Zealand, which was where I stumbled across the analysis path. Right.
And for those few years, moving to Ireland and Ballina. What club in Ballina? Was it like just Ballina Rugby Club or something?
Yeah, it was Ballina Rugby Club. Yeah, okay. We were in the All-Ireland League.
All-Ireland League at that time. And were you doing any formal badges or coaching training in parallel to that or prior to that, or to kind of really develop that coaching skill?
I'd done... as a professional, you had to do a level 1 in Wales, so I'd done that, and I'd done a level in New Zealand when I was here originally. So I'd had a couple of pieces of paper which give me a little bit of credibility, but I would say 90% of coaching is actually you learn when you're on the job, like most jobs. Really. When you cut in your teeth and you're in the mixer, that's when you start to learn a lot.
Oh, very interesting. So when you went back over to New Zealand, the opportunity to start doing some video analysis work presented itself. Like that whole area. Last year, one of my first guests on the podcast, I talked to a lady, Lisa Fallon, who is she's a video analysis coach for Cork City and also the Northern Irish soccer team. And we were talking about her growing up watching videotapes as well of football matches and just having this passion to try and break it down, just similar to what you had mentioned. But was it still relatively new at that point in the mid-2000s, the video analysis work?
Well, there was a company set up in New Zealand which was probably were leading at the time, and they were heavily involved in right the way through New Zealand rugby, and they were coding, or what we would call coding, which is basically tagging all the events that would occur on the rugby field and collating a massive amount of data on what goes on in a rugby field and how it was measured. So that system was through the professional ranks really in the country.
Right.
And I when I moved back, there was an old coach of mine who said, look, you'd be really, because I had a degree in computer science, but never really used it, only in a teaching manner. And there was an opportunity there. He said, look, with your skill set, like you've obviously played professionally, you coach and you understand how to use a computer. So that was half a battle. Would you be interested in helping us, in analysis for club rugby? So that was how it started. And what I did was, I was working as well. I had a job, but on the weekends I'd go and video a couple of club games and tag the events of the games, meet with coaches from the clubs on the Monday night, and give them a breakdown of what had happened in their games, and then they could do what they wanted with the information. So that's kind of how it started. Monday nights the teams got less and less as the season went on, and there was one team that really kind of took up every week and said, look, we really like what you do, and how many other teams use it? And I said, well, no one, a lot of the teams had just dropped off by then, and didn't really see the value of it. So they said, look, would you help us? So yeah, no problem. I could help, and they won the competition that year for the first time for 20-something years, I think. It's
like a Moneyball comparison there, movie type comparison. Just interesting, when you were doing that work at the weekends and bringing it out to the clubs on the Monday, was that kind of voluntary? You were trying to sell that service to them, or was it something they had already kind of committed to using and just gave up on?
Well, they'd committed to using it,
okay.
But it was voluntary from my perspective.
Yeah.
It was just why don't I just see where this can go? And the fact then that I thought, well, I can still stay involved in the game. I'm actually watching rugby. I get to watch rugby games. I get to really kind of break down a game. And as a player, I thought I knew the game, but I had no idea until I started to coach and until I started to use the analysis side of the game. It was really opened up my eyes. So that was how it started. We won the competition, and the Wellington Rugby Union had come in very quickly and said, look, can you do the same thing for us? And so I started to work with the provincial side in Wellington, and I only did I didn't do very long with the provincial side because I got picked up by the Hurricanes and started work there, and within half a season I'd been picked up by the All Blacks.
Wow.
So it had gone pretty quickly, purely because I think it was my way of thinking to myself, right, well, I'm going to give this a go. This can teach me the game. I'll go back into coaching at some stage, but I really want to spend time learning the game. And at that point, I'd started to meet some really smart operators in the game, and spending time with them, just sitting down talking about the game. And that's when you kind of realize that you don't really know that much about it. It was. I was very fortunate to be able to do that.
Very cool. one question that comes up for me there. So when you were bringing that Monday night analysis to the groups and they were dripping off and one stayed around, one I suppose was, were you providing just were you providing insights and kind of advice and guidance, or were you just presenting the information and they had to kind of interpret it themselves, or was it a mix?
No, it was just advice and guidance. Yeah. Because that I think you have a number of type of analysts. Where my skill set differed was the road in New Zealand analysts took were IT people, generally because they knew how to use a computer and they could put some stats together and then they'd give it to the coach and that was them done, you know. But because of my skill set, that wasn't really how I approached it. And it was only by chance I thought to myself, well, I really want to give this a go and I want to try and be the best in the world. So who do I need to know in order to be the best in the world? And I knew someone who had an email address for the guy who worked for the All Blacks. And I emailed him and I never thought he'd come back to me.
Brilliant.
I thought, there's no way he'd actually give me the time of day, you know. But anyway, it turned out that the All Blacks were in Wellington shortly, and he got hold of me and said, look, can we meet for a coffee? And I sat down with him and I said, look, I want to learn. And he explained my background, and that's when he said to me, look, you've got a completely different skill set to everybody else in the country, and what are you doing on the game on the weekend? Because we play France and I could do with a hand.
Very cool.
But that was, you know, I was then still learning the craft of using the technology and understanding the information, and but I was always coming at it from a coach's perspective because that was how my kind of brain worked.
What did you put in the I'm fascinated about the email, because if I send an email to, I don't know, Tony Robbins and say, Tony, can you come on to the podcast? It's about 1% better, you know, don't tend to get a response. But what was your kind of hook in? Like, I can make the All Blacks 10% better or something like that? Or
No, it was never at that angle. What I've found over the years is just asking people advice is a very good starter in an email, because people are never threatened by that. They always think, I'm happy to give advice. So I found that, and I've still maintained that when contacting people, is just asking for advice, because ultimately that's what you're after.
Yeah.
And that's what I was after. I wasn't after his job. I was after advice to be the best in the world. So I had no idea that I didn't really understand the lay of the land and the framework in which he was working to. So it was kind of non-threatening in that way.
Very cool. And I suppose, does that say a lot about the mindset of the person who's the guy at the time you were talking to, or can you even say?
No, yeah, it was a guy by the name of Andy Sullivan. He was he'd been working for the Crusaders, and he'd been working for the All Blacks, and then he eventually left the All Blacks and went to work for the Wallabies.
Okay, but even that, his mindset, and I suppose maybe this is a question that you can answer around the culture and being open to different things. Like he said to you, this is a skill set that we don't have, and that's something we want to incorporate and help us improve. Was that, I suppose, obviously refreshing, but was that something you had then started to see in general, that they weren't fixed in any way, was trying to continually improve, even though they were already potentially the best?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, Rob, I kind of stumbled across that the life in New Zealand, and it's one of the things that made me want to live here, is how they approached life. I remember one year working for when I was playing rugby, and I was working in a Telecom, which is the biggest kind of telephone company, and I'd made a mistake. I can't remember what it was, but I think I did something, and I thought, I'm going to be absolutely dragged across the coals here. Yeah. But the boss was fantastic. And all the boss had said was, "What did you learn?" This is the first thing he said. "What did you learn?" I goes, "I learned this." And he said, "Great, let's move on." And that was it. And I thought, wow, how good is that? I want to. That's how I want to live my life. So when you meet people, and like Andy was the same, very open, very look, you got a great skill set. I can use you as much as you can use me. Why don't can you give me a hand and I'll show you kind of how it works. So and that was because we're a small country and there's a lot of collaboration that goes on, and that's how they approach things, which was something that I really liked and wanted to live my life that way.
Is that a value that's ingrained in the school system of taking a chance, making a mistake, not getting punished for that? Where does that come from, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. It's incredibly encouraging. Everybody's kind of helping each other, and it's like I say, it's a small country, and we tend to try and find ways to make things work and how to fix problems and how to, rather than dwell on the problem itself. And like I said, it was something that really resonated with me very early, and I thought that's the way I want to live my life.
It's definitely a good feeling to have, isn't it? That it puts you in a positive state of mind and less, I suppose, less fearful if you're going to get reprimanded for making a mistake. That kind of brings a kind of a fear mentality, and that develops, I suppose, and festers if it's something that's around a lot. So that's cool.
Yeah, like it kicks in that emotion, doesn't it? And you invariably, a lot of people who make mistakes know that they've done that. Yeah. So harping on about what they've done is, they probably know that they've made the mistake. So it's just about how you rectify it, and it's the response is the key. And if you start to live your life in that response mindset, then I think it takes away a little bit of that fear and opens up, your growth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. So the whirlwind hurricane, even maybe is probably another word you used, but you start. So from the time of that coffee to the time of full on working for the All Blacks, what was that, like 6 months or not even, or?
It was 6 months. I'd met Andy, had coffee. I'd gone into camp a couple of months later, and I was still working with the Hurricanes. And Andy, I hadn't heard anything then for a while. I was just chipping away, and got a call from Andy to say that they needed a backup person. Every member of the management team needed a backup person for the World Cup, and would I be on standby? Remember that conversation very, very vividly, because we were the birth of our daughter was imminent around the same time, and my wife Kate, I'd gone to her and said, "Look, this is a possibility," and typical kind of response from my wife was, "Well, it's okay. It's only our first kid. We'll have more, so don't worry about it. Make sure you go."
Oh God, good one.
So so it was a great. That was all I needed to hear, really. So I said, "Yep." And then I went back into camp before the All Blacks assembled to leave for France at 2007. So I assembled with them in the camp and spent the week with them, learning, understanding. And obviously that was another piece of fortune, because Andy had a bit of a role change during that time and needed to spend a lot of his that week in front of a computer putting DVDs together for leaving players, because they were quite big on a lot of the players that were leaving. They wanted to leave them with a few memories and things like that. So when I got into camp, Andy said, "Look, just going to have to run the whole thing."
Nice.
So he said, "I'm just going to be locked away in the hotel." So that was an opportunity, which was great. And that's when I started to spend a lot of time with Wayne Smith. And he was the person really who just completely opened my eyes to what was going on in a game and understanding a game. And very, very responsive to how I worked as well. So pretty cool to be involved with.
Wow. So the whole 2007 World Cup experience was your first real in-depth engagement with the group, and what did you kind of take from that? And I suppose, was there even any input or anything you had to add during that from the analysis that made any impact?
No, not at that time.
Not at that time.
It was purely learning. I just needed, like, it was a learning experience for me, and very much like my first year, really. I guess I can go on to that, but what happened after that was obviously there was a lot of the aftermath of 2007, because it wasn't a very good, wasn't a good campaign, and I was just about to start with Hurricanes, and then I had a phone call from the manager, Darren Shane, to say, look, would you be interested in applying for the All Black role, because Andy had left.
Right.
He'd gone to the Wallabies. So I went and applied for the job, went through the process, and was fortunate enough to get it.
And what was that role? What was the title of that role? Was it obviously a morphing, kind of changing role as well?
No, it was performance analyst.
Okay.
But the first thing for me was my approach was, test matches are short, in prep time, and because when we're together, you're actually, you're away, and so my approach was to basically try and mimic as much as what Andy had done in my first campaign,
right,
and just make notes and be very studious and provide a service to them that being used to from his perspective, which was literally just plugging computers in, printing out stats, and that was me,
Right.
Until I could actually sit down and see where it could go, what we could do better, So that was kind of the approach that I took in my first year.
Right. And I guess with that, you were probably, I'm guessing, very keen to say, right, this is steadying the ship, or I'm just kind of learning the ropes here, but there's so much more in me here that I actually want to try and change things or tweak things. Was there a level of trust that you had to build with the players before that could happen, do you think?
Yeah, look, it was trust with the players, trust with the coaches. I remember really clearly one evening, and I was up, I think it was around 3 o'clock in the morning, or 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'd walk past Wayne Smith's room, and it was on, and we keep a bath towel over the door, so that, because we spent so much time in hotels, it's like a home really, and you saw the bath towel, you knew that someone was in. So knocked on his door, and he was hunched over the computer, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he was trying to change some stats which the analysis company had provided, but he didn't agree with.
Right.
And I said to him, "This is crazy, like you should be coaching. You've got a session today. I can do this." And that's when he said, "Right, well, let's." I said, "All you need to do is show me the game. Show me how you look at it. Show me what you want." And he said that he hadn't been used to having that support, because the person was an IT person before, and but ultimately it wasn't my skill set, So that's where it kind of started. Really, was Wayne sitting down with me and going, "This is what I need. This is how I see it," and then me providing it, and that trust building. And I did the same with Graham Henry and Steve and the rest of the coaching staff, and that's what built that trust. After the year ended, and I wrote a report. I sat down with them and wrote a report and said, "Look, if you want an IT person, then you need to go and get one, because it's not me.
Right.
But I can provide these things, and this is how I can help you." And that's kind of how we move forward. Then going into my second year.
Very cool. So they were well on board. Do you remember a standout moment in the next couple of years where you were doing analysis, you identified maybe a pattern emerging or something that needed tweaking, and it being played onto the players and then putting it into practice and it having a positive result, or was there events like that happening regularly?
Yeah, they started to become regular ones, but the key thing for me was I always had in my mind that I was providing a service. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't go directly to the players. I'd go straight to Wayne or Steve, or look, this is what we've seen, and he's right, okay, and then they'd present it. So there was a real clear boundary mm-hmm. of what my role was and where it ended and what the coach needed to do. The players, it was a little bit more interesting because you spend a lot of time looking at their game and analysing from an individual perspective. I go through every tackle, and so they developed a lot of trust there because they'd known that I'd started to watch a lot of game and knew what I was kind of looking at. So that developed over the years to regular one-on-ones with them, because they trusted what I was being able to do and bring. And so but by 2015, my role had completely changed.
When I was thinking about this, was you coming into these, world-class, top of their game professionals and giving them advice or telling them what they could tweak. Sounds like with the mindset of the New Zealanders, they were pretty open to that. I would imagine that mightn't be the case in every country or every team, where they might say, what have you done, sort of thing, compared to me, and that closed mindset. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, it's that building of trust. If you spend, I was lucky. I was there for 9 years, I think, and over that time we had a backbone which was pretty steady. Apart from quite a few people leaving, and after the World Cup in 2011, and some different coaches changes, and trust was very, very strong with that group, and I became a real integral part of the coaching group, and the players knew that, and but that does take a little bit of time, and you've got to understand people to be able to read that boundary. And with certain people, I wouldn't push anything until I knew that I had that trust and respect to be able to say things to them. So it wasn't in never a way in confronting. It was always a way of for them to try and get better, and their mindsets, to be fair to the player, were always, they were trying to get better as well. So we were all trying to grow and go in the same direction.
And you mentioned between 2011 and 2015 your role changed massively. Maybe talk to me about some of the big changes, I suppose, the extra responsibility that you got with that, I suppose, trust and the results coming.
Yeah, it had grown. The demand on information had grown, and it was just me, and I was trying to do a technical role as well as a tactical role, and I felt like I just couldn't really stretch to that. So we ended up having a second person in who could take the technical stuff, and all the plug in the cameras and do all that kind of stuff. Right. All that was self-taught by me. I didn't have a clue when I started on doing that, so right. I kind of taught myself as I went along, and but they knew, the environment knew that I needed some support, and if I was going to be the best that I could be to give them the best information that they wanted, that I'd need to be purely looking at as a game, the technical side of the game. So we had someone in to help me do the technical stuff, and then I became purely in the data and the video and one-on-ones and running meetings and stuff like that. So it became a big change, but by the end of it all.
But it sounds like that's exactly the type of move you wanted to get into, more real performance enhancement as opposed to just the kind of, as you said, the tactical, putting videos out there and that's a bit more probably procedural that you could easily hand off, but the real insights is probably where you were keen to focus on.
Yeah, because again, that was my, I always knew that I wanted, my end goal was to be a coach again, so then it was kind of, well, how can I make this work? How can I do this? And I was really aware of, first and foremost, that I was an analyst, but when you spend so much time with players and they know that you watch all the games and they trust you implicitly with the information that you're giving them, then they do rely heavily on you. And but in the back of my mind, I was always right, where's this going? When do I finish? When do I go back to coaching? What's the perception going to be when I go back to coaching? So and what I mean by that was the perception would be, oh, he's an analyst, so he hasn't really, who's he coached, So and I knew that. So after 2011, I went back coaching club. I was coaching schools. I went to coach club, and through obviously my relationship with the All Blacks, I was still doing my All Black role, but trying to coach anyone and everyone I could outside of that to keep on the grass. And I was very fortunate through some feedback from the players that Mark Hammett of the Hurricanes, he'd asked me to be involved with their campaign for 2014 as doing the defence as an assistant. Okay. So that was great for me to go back and do that, as well as do the All Blacks, and then World Cup year back in full time 2015, and Wayne Smith had come back for that year as well, so I wanted to work with him again, just to give me he'd had a little bit of time out, so it was really important for me to reconnect with him and to see what he'd learned in his time out, and try and he was a big mentor of mine, and I loved working with him. So, and the draw of back-to-back World Cups was very, very strong. The fact that no one had done it, no other team had done it, that was a real draw card. But I knew after that I'd finish, and I would then transition into full time back into coaching.
I guess you had reached or re-reached the peak of what you probably could do within that. During that time, as you started getting more hands-on with the coaching, did opportunities present themselves? Did you kind of push things back, or were you always kind of cognizant of after that World Cup it was the right time to try something different?
Yeah, it was. I definitely made my mind that was the time. I needed to go, and I had an opportunity. I'd gone down to the Crusaders, and they were interested, and ultimately it was John Kerwin at the Blues who I met with and offered me a role straight away after the World Cup. So while we were based in Wellington, so it was something that I couldn't really turn down. Sure. And I was super excited by Auckland and the fact that they hadn't really done that well, and the potential of the project, and I thought it was really exciting. So after that World Cup, we shifted to Auckland, and it was just before just after the World Cup, and John had rung me and then it said, "Oh, look, I'm actually leaving." So I thought, okay, how's this going to work? Yeah. But he said Tana Umaga was going to take over the role, and that Tana would ring me, and I'd had a really good relationship with Tana anyway. I'd known him for a long time, been in Wellington and played against him, and we had friends of friends and stuff. And then Tana rang me and said, "Look, are you still interested?" And he said, "Yep." So, and that was kind of my next path then of moving back into Super Rugby and trying to embrace that challenge.
All that time, as you were building to that moment of becoming a defence coach, were you putting together your own program, approaches, how you would I suppose, put a strategy together and implement that. That's something that you were forming all the way through, or was it until you got that concrete role then you really had to focus in on that? Just interested in seeing how that might have evolved.
Yeah, look, that's a good question. To be honest, Rob, probably from the time I knew I was going to do it after 2011, I used to sit down with the All Black calendar and plot where are we going on tour, who can I meet. So that was the way I approached it. Who can I meet? Who can help me? Because I knew the All Black way, and I knew our methods, how we coached. But I knew that I needed to kind of grow my awareness of what was happening outside the game and just talk to different people. So I'd plot the calendar, and so we'd be in Cape Town here, so maybe I can meet a Brendan Venter, or if we were in London, I'd meet a Paul Gustard, or I'd go and meet as many people as I could who just through conversations I'd maybe that would work, maybe this would work. So I kept on. I've got books and books and books and books of notes and things over the years, where I was. So I really needed to put myself in the best position that I could, so that when I had an opportunity, I was absolutely ready to go. And I didn't have all the answers, Rob. And I knew I didn't have all the answers, but I'd had a rough an idea of where I wanted to go and how I wanted to approach it. And you've got to be able to just try things. And I was certainly, and I'm still not by any means the finished article. But if you've got a big growth mindset and you're a learner, then it becomes a lot easier that way.
Yeah, and
I find.
No, absolutely, and I think even just picking up on what you're saying, you were doing a lot of that analysis and research and building those relationships and gathering all that information. I think there's a point, I suppose, where you could do that forever and never really learn a whole lot, and then by taking on the role within the first month, you've probably learned how much of that is valuable or not at this point in time. The weird comparison I have here is just even doing a podcast, right? I could spend months planning it and getting it right, but until I record an episode and put it out and let people hear it, I don't know if it's any good or not, really, so it's kind of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such little things, isn't there? Like, I remember going back to club after being involved. I was involved with the All Blacks for a long time, and I had been for maybe 6 years at that point, and I'd gone back to coach club rugby. And at that point in the All Blacks, you could the players were very, very good, obviously, and understood their bodies, and you may say to them it would be one part of their body that's what you need to focus on, and they'd go, yep, right, got it, and they'd be away. And it was actually when I went back to club, and then you start, right, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the reason why we're doing it. Like, let's go. And you see 100 things wrong. And you're like, wow, hang on. It's everything. There's so much wrong here, but you have to kind of think on your feet and go, right, what's the really important message? What's the first thing? What's the lead domino that's going to knock everything else off, So those kind of processes that you're on field and going through are really, really important, and I found it so beneficial to be able to do that.
So the 2 years you were with the Auckland Blues for the 2 years, how would you?
3.
I suppose, 3 years in full, right? Okay.
Yeah.
How would you describe that journey? What were the kind of key takeaways from it? How has it even made you better?
That's a good question. I think it's the biggest lessons for me were probably in my first year. It's not what you know; it's what they know. Ultimately, it's what you can teach. But it's ultimately the ability to get a lot of information that you've got in your head and out. So that they understand it, and that's an important lesson is how you come across. And how you deliver things, and trying to find your coaching, your style,
Sure.
Because I'd learned off a lot of different people, and trying to find out what's my approach. So those were all little tweaks that we where I kind of learnt. That was in my first year. Second year, I thought we were better defensively. That was the hard sell. Really was defensively, because the game here, and I say here in New Zealand, is very, very attack based. It's ingrained when you're a young kid. Like my boys now are 5 and 6, that they pick up the rugby ball bare feet, and they run around. That's what they do, and so attack comes natural. So it does take a while to try and change your mindset around defensively, and I thought we made some good strides into that in our second year. But I'd started to see a few things which I felt were potentially could be the undoing of us. And what I started to study is, I got to a point where I thought to myself, right, if I want to be the best coach that I can be, and I need to give myself to the team. But ultimately, I need to find out who I am as a person first and foremost. Who am I as a person? So I went down that road, which I've found incredibly beneficial. Actually, before I can teach someone or really fully be authentic with my relationships, I need to understand how I operate and who I am as a coach, who I am as a dad and a husband. And I got to that kind of, some people may say it would be a midlife crisis, but it's actually not. I don't think it is, but it's just it's
an awakening, I think.
An awakening,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the know thyself. It's something I'm a coach, an executive business performance coach outside of sport, obviously, and that whole question of knowing thyself and just emotional intelligence, I could talk for hours about it, but I think we go wandering for so long, and I think you do start to ask that question, but it's a question of timing as well, and it only happens when it's meant to happen, so I'm totally on board with you there.
Yeah, so I kind of started to think about my personal philosophy and what it was, and then if I can articulate what my personal philosophy was, maybe I could share that with my players and be a bit more vulnerable with them and get them to open up and kind of create that bond and authenticity with them, and that's kind of what I did. I was very fortunate to go to the States on a fact-finding mission, really, and I went to Chicago Cubs, met some wonderful people there, and then managed to meet a guy who was a friend of mine, Mike Gervais, who works for the Seattle Seahawks, and I spent a lot of time with Michael. He's exceptionally bright. He's one of the best in his field, if not the best in his field. So I was very fortunate to spend a lot of time with Mike, and I still do. I still speak to him really regularly about coaching and really trying to harness that personal philosophy, so that when I was in an environment, I knew these are the behaviors that I want to live by, and these are the behaviors that I actually abide by. And if I saw any behaviors below the line or above the line, then I'd be able to articulate that towards my way of thinking. And I think spending time on yourself it's probably a lifelong project.
Yeah.
But not many people actually do it. It's hard work. It's hard work to be able to open up and kind of understand yourself and really live a growth mindset. I think growth mindset gets branded around a lot, and really live it is hard. It's an ongoing development. It's an ongoing commitment to be able to do that. And anyway, that's what founded the base of my coaching. And I got to a point in my third year and thought, we've got this horribly wrong as a club. And I felt that we were going in two different directions. Me is where I wanted to go in my coaching. I wanted to be the best coach I can be. I want to be an international coach. So we managed to get through this year, and I had a contract extension offer of a couple of years, but ultimately decided not to do it and wanted to change direction.
But that in itself is you getting to know yourself, right? That you had the, I suppose, I don't know, is resilience not the right word there, but just the self-belief to say that's not the right decision for me and to go in a different direction. It's probably something you mightn't have done 2 years ago, right?
No, that's right. I wouldn't have. And, to come home to your wife and your kids and you say, oh, I resigned today.
Yeah, it's brave.
And it's wow, but again, I'm extremely fortunate to have a wife who lives the same philosophies, and she has her own personal philosophy, but she's highly growth mindset and she's an entrepreneur herself, so she's a high performer. So that both of us are able to help each other as we go along. And yeah, it was once you have that line in you and once you understand your philosophy, it was a relatively easy decision. I don't actually agree with that. I want to go in a different direction, but thanks very much. I've learned a lot. Culture was a big thing, and I didn't agree with where we were going with the culture. So yeah, that was a good decision. But I believe that things happen for a reason, and since then, obviously, I've shifted to Samoa and back into the international arena again, which is really, really exciting.
No, it sounds exciting, and I think we're just touching on some of the stuff that I am fascinated about, about behaviours and values, and just interested, how did you have an approach to identify some of those key behaviours or values for you? I know it's a journey and it's probably always going to be, as you said, a project lifelong, but was there anything you did to unearth some of them?
Yeah, I actually sat down and wrote a number of values which were what I, humility and integrity and perseverance, courage, and all those kind of things, really, and just sat down and thought, right, which ones relate to me, which ones resonate with me the most, and then again going through my time in the States, harnessing those conversations and spending some time saying, okay, well, these are the ones that resonate with me the most. Mike Gervais always used to say, if you've nailed it, you should be able to say what your personal philosophy is within 25 words or less.
Yeah.
And it's something that him and Pete Carroll did with the Seahawks. You would have read, I saw it on your site actually, with the Win Forever.
Yeah, it was actually Issa that recommended the book. I haven't read it yet, but I'm definitely on the list. So yeah. Yeah.
So that was Pete's. So Mike and Pete, they work together, and so I just followed a framework like that, really, which again, it was something that really resonated with me, and I found it a very easy framework, and as we touched upon, I think it's something that's ongoing. Like you tweak it as you go through life.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people about their core value set. I do it a lot in coaching as well, and different approaches, different techniques, different ideas to capture them and to make sure that they're real and that they're meaningful. But I always love hearing different views on it. Mike Gervais, somebody, geez, I think I might have to ask you for a connection with him as well. I'd love to chat with him potentially at some point. But so many good stuff, bits and pieces there, and I think a lot of the questions around getting better, improvement, you've touched on. We touched on values and decision making, and I guess you have mentors and influencers there. You talked about your style of coaching though. What is that like now? How would you define your style, or what would that look like or sound like?
Well, for me, I am really athlete centered. So how my approach is all about building relationships. So that's the key thing for me. Is I'm a relationship based coach, and trying to make them as authentic as possible and empowering the player. I question a lot. That's the approach we have here in New Zealand. It is very athlete led. It's very a question approach rather than being a dictator. I think it's at some point you've got to have the skill set of both. There's times when you need to dictate, and there's times when you have a little bit more freedom to be able to collaborate. But ultimately, for me, it's a collaborative approach. How I run I have a defense unit. So within the team, I pick each position will have one representative from a defensive perspective, and I allow them to lead, and I facilitate really discussions around how they want to defend on the weekend and what we need and how they think we should train. And I know what I want because I've done all my work. But if they have a piece of skin in it, and then it makes them accountable, and they really hold that. And that approach is something that obviously we did through the All Blacks as well. It's very, very powerful, I believe, because ultimately, unfortunately, we can't go on the field and make tackles anymore. Rob, my shoulders are killing me.
Yeah.
So I can't even tackle my 5 or 6 year old at the moment because my shoulders and my back are ruined from the game. So we can't play the game anymore. So being able to, it's a decision based game, and being able to give them the tools and ultimately create an environment where they can learn and fail and be comfortable in that. But as long as we're learning and heading in the right direction, and encouraging them, that's my style.
Very cool. I'm conscious we're up on the hour, which has flew by, and I have two last ones, and this one being a video analyst and very analytical. Where does intuition come into your kind of approaches and decision making, and how do they combine? Again, intuition is something I'm fascinated about, as I repeating myself on this show over and over. But what comes up when I mention those two together?
Great question. Intuition is an interesting thing, isn't it? Does intuition come from experience? So if I for me, I'll sit down and watch a lot of my skill set, which makes me a point of difference as a coach, is now the ability to look through a lot of information, but really narrow it down to go back to the Lou Holt's philosophy of what's important now. So having got, I'll watch 10 games or however many games I need to, and then be able to say, well, that's not important, but these are the things that are really, really important for me for this week, and this is what we need to concentrate on. And then trying to sell that to the players or my leadership group, and then letting them drive. So that's kind of the approach. And then some of my intuition probably would be backed up by the fact that I've done a lot of work in the background to know I've got to that point.
That makes an awful lot of sense.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. It's definitely a different view, but as you were explaining it, it kind of clicked for me. So obviously, as you see 1,000 videos of matches over the last few years, and it's your intuition is telling you what to go for because of the experience of going through it over and over again. I guess that's kind of what's happening, combining the two.
Yeah, that's what I feel. And then because it stimulates as I go along. I can think, I'll put that. I'm lucky enough to be able to put it on a back burner. So we won't need that this week, but we're playing this game next week, and it might. Okay, and I'll park that somewhere, and then next I'll go back and I may forget about it, but then somewhere along the line something will kick in and go, oh no, you've actually. Oh yeah, that's right. Let's have a look at this clip. Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah. Do you have an approach to actually keep track of that? So, like, project management is a background that I have, and it's very planning orientated, and even putting all these things together, I have kind of lists and lists. How do you kind of keep track of everything and to know when this might be important? Is there workflow tools or methods you have?
You would hate to see my desktop, Rob.
There's icons all over it, is there?
Oh, it's dreadful.
Oh,
absolutely
God, no.
dreadful. But it's organized chaos.
Right.
It's organized. I know where it is.
Right.
I use mind map. I mind map quite a bit.
Okay.
I for big picture things, What I find, kind of talking about big picture things from an analysis perspective, I believe now that we've got to a point where New Zealand, I feel that I had this conversation last week because I'm still involved in the analysis program and developing it from a coach's perspective here.
Yeah.
And I feel that we've got to a point where we've got a lot of information, but what do we do with it? And it seems that from a coach's perspective, time is a big thing. Time to deliver, time to do this, time to do that, especially on the field. So really, it's having that the big picture, the big rocks, as we would say, the big rocks, or the lead dominoes, however you want to phrase it, but being able to make sure these are the fundamental things that I need to cover off this week, or these are the structures that we need to build, and then making sure that you nail those. So I mind map those, which I found really helps me to go through that process, to be able to, okay, what's the process? So I draw a process and then go, okay, these are the big rocks within that process. And that's what I'll constantly make sure that we nail. And that's a good example of what I've managed to do with Samoa, because we get together on Saturday, and most of our players are based in the UK. So they play in France. Some of them are from the Southern Hemisphere. We've only got a week to prepare before our first test. So really important for me to be very simple, very but methodical, and I've got a lot of detail which I sit behind if needed. And on that, Rob, one of the best things that I've found from a coaching perspective that I've done is to do the social styles of learning. And I think that is really, really apt for business as well as sport. Is if you really want to understand your staff or your players, then getting to know how they learn is really, really important, and what type of personality they are. Because then you can tailor your approach to giving the detail to people. Overall, if you're in a meeting, then you have to make sure that you cover all the learning styles. But again, it may be a time factor that you're battling against, because someone else wants to say something in the meeting and someone else wants to say something. And so you've got a short time to cover a big picture. This is what we're about, and these are the reasons why. Got to sell your why. So that Simon Sinek, that Simon Sinek approach of start with your why is really really relevant, and then have that understanding individually. Well, I know, Rob, I know that you're a We use the 4 quadrants. You know, the ones I'm not sure whether you've used. Whether the personality kind of types.
The disc one, is it, or is it the?
It's like this, yes,
the red and blue and
the red,
green.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's multiple different ways of doing it. It's, you know, whether you're amiable, whether you're analytical, whether you're a driver, whether you're a, you know. So, but disc is another great example. And if I know you're a red, then I can approach you in this way. If I know you're a green, I may have to put my arm around you and have a joke with you to lighten up your mood a wee bit, and then we can get into stuff. If you're another colour and you're a driver, I need you just to be straight away. I've got to be honest with you and give you the facts, because you don't want all the waffle.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good approach.
Yeah, so that's I'm very big on that as well. I use that a lot.
Yeah.
For my one-on-ones, and having that approach builds that authenticity then with your relationships.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think authenticity seems to be coming through a lot as well, and you know, not just in sport but in business as well. If you kind of can't be authentic, I think people can see that pretty quickly. You know, they can spot it, and that's when you lose that connection or trust or potential relationship building. Can be much tougher. So
yeah, and look, you're not always going to be you know, and you're not always going to be right, you know, and I think so being vulnerable is another key.
In vulnerability though, is it something that you find challenging in the world of professional rugby from the relationships or that you've seen, or are people more and more moving towards that? Is it a value of the New Zealand team, for example? It
is a value of the New Zealand team, because you have authentic relationships and you have that trust that builds the trust. And I think, you know, when you're a young coach, you potentially it's tough being vulnerable, and some coaches don't want to be vulnerable, or you know, in business as well, because people see it as a weakness. But it's a massive strength if you can change that mindset around. And I think it's a fine line, Rob. You can't always be vulnerable, because then people will go, oh God, I was vulnerable again.
He's weak.
Does he actually know what he's doing? Or, you know?
Yeah.
But there's certain times where you can be vulnerable enough, and to stop that ripple in the pond effect. Go, hey mate, that's my fault. I've stuffed that. You know, or the approach again of, boys, I want you to do. You know, this we agreed to. This is what I want you to do, and we disagree. We disagree and commit to it. So not everyone. You may not get everyone in the room, but if they're willing to put themselves. The team of themselves, and disagree and commit to what you're doing, and then be vulnerable enough as a coach to say, hey, look, if this doesn't work, then it's on me. It's not on you, because this is the approach that I think we need to do, you know? So yeah, vulnerability, not every week, but it's a very powerful thing.
And it comes with experience, I presume, as well, you know, when to and when not to show it. So very true. Last one, Alistair, and you've touched on books a lot, or kind of influencers during our conversation, which is great. Some of those I've already got on my book page, but any one or two impactful reads you've had of late that spring up that has changed your thinking, helped you unlock something? What might spring to mind there?
Yeah, I've got about 5 on the go at the moment.
I know.
And I can't read them. I'm terrible for reading them in
parallel. Is it
when I'm working? You know, like I can't. Yeah. But obviously the one on that you've got, which was Stephen Covey's book, the Seven Habits. Yeah, that's would be in my top 5.
Okay.
The Obstacle is the Way.
I've heard of that. I don't think I have it up there.
Ryan Holiday.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah,
I found that very good, and I've actually given that to some of my athletes. Again, to do with adversity and the stories in the title, but finding that trying to change your mindset to see that the obstacle is the way forward, and you approach it, and you don't try to avoid it, and you confront it. And very, very good book.
Cool. Yeah, very good. Any others that are jumping up?
Jumping up. There's a very clever man your side of the world, Damien Hughes, who's just finished a book called The Barcelona Way, which is good for cultures.
And is that in Barcelona, as in the city, or the team?
Sorry, as in the team.
Okay,
based on Pep Guardiola's influence in what he's done. That's good for culture and things like that. If things aren't going well and you're not sure from a leadership perspective, there's a book called The Turn the Ship Around. I found that very good too, because that confirms what you're not to do.
Sometimes the best learnings are things not to do.
And I've just been through that.
Well, it sounds like, though, that you've gone through some very great highs, and not everything was going well, but been with New Zealand for 3 World Cups, learned an awful lot, and then you've gone into the club game and faced another massive set of challenges and learned a lot from. So it's a great mix, I suppose. It puts you in a good place for the future.
Yeah, I think it does, and I think my best. The best time for me, without a doubt, as a coach has been with the Blues, because a lot of people would see it as a failure, really. But for me, I don't view failures like that. I see them as great learnings, and I've learned. It's been fantastic. And I'm really, really pleased, and I genuinely believe that I'm really pleased to have gone through it, because at the time there's certain things that you go, oh, this is terrible, and things aren't going, well, and an on-field performance shows that. But if you've got the right mindset, then it's a great learning opportunity, and I've been really blessed to have those, and hopefully many more to come. Not failures, but
more learnings.
Learnings,
yeah.
Shall we say?
No, it sounds like you're only getting started, Alistair, and it's been great
just getting warmed up.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating to hear your story, and picked out some really cool stuff there that I'm sure people will enjoy listening to as well. So look, that's been great. Do you want to give a shout out how folks can get in touch? I know we're on Twitter, following you on Twitter. Is there any other ways if anyone wants to drop you an email after getting inspired from this podcast? Yeah, I'm on Twitter. Now you've asked me something which I'm you know what I'm like. I'll put the link into the notes. I'm not very good on this. Not very good on this technology age, to be fair. Yeah, no, I'll give your at Twitter. Would probably be the best one. Yeah, Twitter seems to be the best for most people. Anyway, no, I'll put a link in there. The other guy was David Marquette. I just remembered his name. David Marquette. Marquet. Okay. Let's turn the ship around. It's good. He is a I'm not sure if they call them captains, but of a submarine. He was took over the worst submarine in the US Naval Army, and turned it around. He's literally turning it around. So that's yeah. So there's some really good stuff in there. Yeah. Excellent. A few more good ones there, Alistair. It's as I said, that book page that I have building is probably I'd say I have half of them at this stage, but I'm just looking at my shelves here, and I have so many that I like. Have you got any for me? Oh God, where do I start? We didn't talk about kind of fundamentals of getting yourself into a good mindset space. For me, it's meditation, and I would I actually,
yeah, you should. I meditate. I'm a big morning routine person.
Yeah, that's what we talked with Isa about, and kind of getting into the habits of doing 3 or 4 things in the morning. There was a book I read called The Autobiography of a Yogi. I always butcher the name. It's Yogananda Paramahansa, I think, is the name of the yogi, and it's about 100 years old. I'll send you a link. It's on the website as well. That's really good. And I'm looking at The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama. I read that not so long ago. That's very good. Really good book, and just, talks about compassion a lot and happiness. And for me, an awful lot of things that come up, and what I do in coaching as well, is around identifying your one thing and then practicing it deliberately over a period of time, and it instills it. Then at the moment I'm trying to do that with swimming. I'm trying to get better at doing swimming, and it's that typical approach of be it happiness, be it compassion, be it gratitude, whatever. So that book was quite good for getting that kind of mindset going as well. So
the other one for you would be Ray Dalio.
The Principles.
Yeah, that's good too.
I haven't read it. I've seen a lot of his clips. He'd be a good guy to get on, but he's kind of difficult. You don't have any connections to him, no?
Nah, I don't. I haven't caught up. I have never spoken to him.
No worries. We'll leave it there for now. So, Alistair, we maybe get back in 2019 and do a book review session or something like that. Thanks so much for doing that. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, mate. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, hopefully you got something out of it as well. A little bit of reflection is good too.
Yeah, for sure. Always. I've done a few of these, and every time you kind of reflect on a few things, it's great.
Perfect. Best of luck with the tour.
Cool. Great. Thanks again for your time, Rob.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, it was brilliant to talk to you, Alistair, and safe travels, and stay in touch.
Okay, will do. Take care, man.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye. So, how did you find it? A good show? Hopefully. Do take a second or two to let me know. And before you do dive off, just a couple of quick call-outs. The new podcast, the 864, 15 minutes long, in fact 864 seconds is the aspiration, is now out and ready for listening. Check it out on the site. Go to the podcast page. There's a link for 864 there, or go on to Apple Podcasts and subscribe. That would be awesome. The 864 is all you have to search for. And it's in all other podcast platforms that you can think of or should be. So, have a listen. Every week I release a 1 Minute Monday video clip, which is also a tip to hopefully make you 1% better. Check that out. It's on the website on the video page. Did you also know that only about 1% of listeners to podcasts, not just my own but all, leave a rating, leave a review, get in touch or give feedback? And I would love if we could buck that trend and put it to 2% for this one. So please do take the time to give me a bit of feedback, give me some ideas about future guests or whatever the hell comes into mind. Just get in touch or rate or review the podcast on Apple. That helps. I'm available at all of the social platforms, pretty much all, at Rob of the Green. That's either with or without the @ sign, but you'll find it under that moniker, so hopefully I'll hear from you there. Last couple of quick ones. Support. So I do offer some pro bono coaching. Get onto the website, the support page, to get in touch. Few hours a month, happy to do that. And if you would like to support the podcast, that would be awesome. You can do so through Patreon and also through purchasing books through the book page on the website. That goes through Amazon and we get a little percentage. I'm not even sure what, but it's something. And finally, just to say thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I know there's lots of other shows out there. It means a lot that you're checking this one out. So have a great rest of day, week, month, year, whatever it may be, and hopefully you're getting 1% better as a result of these shows. Take care and good luck.